Thank you, everyone. Okay, let me check that this is working or not. Okay, perfect. Let's get started. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Shiv Aggarwal, founder and CEO of EarthID, an award-winning decentralized identity platform. I'm also leading GBA across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. As a part of the GBA leadership team, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizing team and the entire GBA community, spearheaded by Kathy and Gerard, for putting together this amazing conference on a topic which is of paramount importance, that is, future of money governance and law. I would also like to thank the attendees for their valuable time and presence, which is crucial to making this event interactive and beneficial for everyone. On that note, let's take a look at the topic of my presentation. So basically, it's privacy and data protection. And I think this is something which all of us worry about, right? On the internet, there is no way to ascertain whether you are interacting with a credible individual or getting scammed by a punk or a bot. This is because the current version of the internet is missing the layer of trust. In the 15 years of my professional career as a certified enterprise architect, I have driven the IT strategy and digital transformations for various global brands. Now I'm focused on driving the digital transformation of the internet through the provision of a safe, secure, and frictionless digital identity. So we'll be talking about quite a few topics today under the banner of privacy and data protection. So basically the topics are privacy, anonymity, confidentiality, and data protection. I would also talk about global data protection laws, primarily GDPR. I would also attempt to cover the what, how, and why of decentralized identity. Okay, so I think it's a very important question, right? What is privacy? And it's in today's connected world, it becomes very important because of IoTs and social media, where we are under constant surveillance. So privacy is an individual's or an entity's right to be left alone or freedom from intrusion. So basically, it's like we should be able to do certain things without being bothered by either organizations or other individuals, right? So that is what privacy is all about. And privacy is an individual's or entity's right to be left alone or freedom from the intrusion, right? As I mentioned, so I'm repeating again the same point. But when we apply this concept to information, it's about control over one's personal information on how it is being collected and how it is being used, right? And this is where I think a lot of data protection clause comes in, which basically gives you control with respect to what, how, and is basically gathered about you as an individual in terms of privacy, consent, and so many other aspects with respect to how the data is being processed, stored, and transported. So now I think within the blockchain and the crypto communities, there has been always a debate about anonymity versus privacy. And it's a very important, I think there's a very important distinction. So I think we can all understand why does Bruce Wayne, a billionaire, needs to wear a mask, right? So it's about protecting the identity, right? But what does that mean? So basically, anonymity is about concealing your identity, but not the actions. Sometimes anonymity is important for, let's say, freedom of speech, or particularly for whistleblowers, right? So it's about when there are certain, I think, impact of your actions, that is when anonymity becomes important, right? And that is where blockchain community and even cryptocurrency, people who are dealing with cryptocurrencies, they basically debate about whether they want anonymity or whether they want privacy. Now, confidentiality is primarily access to information, right? It's about basically keeping something as a secret or disclosing it to only people of privileged value, right? I think we all might know one or two instances where confidential information is leaked and the custodian of the information faces the repercussions. And I think we have seen this in a lot of, I think if people have worked in corporates or maybe government roles, we get access to certain information which is fit for certain purpose and it cannot be shared with everyone, right? So that is what confidential information becomes. Now, data protection is the process of safeguarding identifiable information or any other confidential information from unauthorized access and misuse. Okay, before I go there, I just want to basically take the example of Bruce Wayne and Batman to basically talk about these different aspects, right? So as a Bruce Wayne, he's a billionaire, and he's basically trying to protect his identity as well as some information about himself. So that is what privacy is, right? But when he becomes a Batman, that is where he is trying to be anonymous because there are certain actions that he's taking which has certain repercussions, right? So that becomes anonymity. But when we talk about confidentiality, so there are a few people who know that Bruce Wayne is the Batman, right? And that is where it becomes important for these people who know this information, they protect this information, this confidential information, right? For example, if they know that Bruce Wayne is Batman, then they should not be telling this to everyone. And similarly, if they know where the Batcave is, they should not be telling this to everyone. So they should not be disclosing a confidential information which they know about someone which has an impact on their lives. So this is how basically the different topics are tied together. Now let's talk about GDPR, right? So GDPR, it's basically General Data Protection Regulation from European Union, and it is one of the most prominent and stringent data protection laws around the world. It lays down the rules around gathering, processing, storage, and movement of personal data of citizens for protection. So again, I think it's basically talking about all the concepts that we discussed about privacy, anonymity, consent, and all those things. So it's about how do you basically apply all those concepts to people's data so that it can be protected. And this is specifically for the citizens of European Union. And basically, I think it's a fundamental right, right? So it's a fundamental right and it's freedom to basically protect your information, right? And similarly, there are a lot of other data protection laws around the world, which we'll come and talk about that. But when we talk about GDPR, there are certain principles that we need to basically consider, right? And if we talk about them, so some of the important aspects are basically the first principle is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So whenever an organization or an entity, when they are handling the personal information of an individual or another entity, they have to be lawful about it. They have to be fair, and they have to be transparent. And I think a lot of us, if you are accessing websites from European Union, you would have started seeing that there are a lot of, I think, cookies that you need to select or deselect with respect to how your information can be gathered and how your information can be processed. So basically, you're providing a consent to access to your information for a specific purpose, right? So this is what GDPR defines. And that is what purpose limitation is, right? So when we talk about purpose limitation, it's about that you are sharing your information, but it's for a specific purpose. So outside that purpose, they should not be processing your information. Similarly, it's about data minimization, right? So obviously, I have a lot of information about myself, but for a certain process or a certain transaction, I think there's a small amount of data that is needed. So this is where basically, if you are sharing your information or the organization which is gathering information about you, they have to do basically, they should gather only the bare minimum of information that is required for a particular transaction. Then accuracy, because obviously what happens is like these organizations and even people, when they gather data about us, sometimes this data goes bad or this data is not synced, right? So it's their responsibility to make sure that whatever data they have gathered, it's basically accurate, right? And also there are storage limitations, because obviously I think depending on different types of data, there's a limitation with respect to how and where it can be stored. So I think we would have seen that sometimes it's at a state level, sometimes it's at a country level, and sometimes it's obviously at the entire European Union level. And similarly, there are the certain data protection laws, for example, in Australia or in maybe some other part of the world or even in US, where you cannot basically transport the data of an individual outside that particular region. The sixth one is basically integrating integrity and the confidentiality. Basically again, so it's about how do you ensure that the data that has been captured, that is basically used in a manner which is driven by integrity, and then also basically the confidentiality of the data is also maintained. And then lastly, accountability. So whoever is gathering this data, whoever is processing this data, whoever is storing this data, or whoever is transporting this data, they are accountable, right? They are accountable for the actions and the repercussions. So now when we talk about GDPR, the individuals have different rights, right? And these rights are about their personal information. And the first right is basically right to be informed, right? It's about an individual has the right that they are being informed what data is being collected about them and for what purpose. So this is very, very important. And that is why, as an example, when we visit any of the portals or websites in European Union, we have to basically provide our consent for various different reasons. That, okay, yes, you can collect this data, but for only these purposes. So it's about the organization needs to inform the end user. Okay, next. Sorry. Yeah, then it's about right of access. So basically, it's like the organization should also provide access that, okay, this is the information that is being held about this particular individual. So that is right of access. Then we have right to rectification, right? Or basically corrections of if somebody identifies an errors or omissions in the data set about an individual or an organization, then they have the right to rectification. So they can basically approach them and then they can basically get it rectified. Then right for erasure. This is very, very important. And this is where basically, let's say if I have shared my information with somebody or some organization for a given purpose, even after providing that consent for usage, I still have the right to erasure. So I can approach that organization and I can ask them to basically delete that information about me from their system. Then they cannot process this further. Or they cannot process this information any further. So they have to delete it from all their systems. Then right to restrict. So basically it's again about it's about processing of the data, but it's restricted, right? It's restricted by the purpose. It's restricted by the consent. The right to the data portability. And then again, it's like because when we collect the data, it can be ported for various different reasons within an organization, within a region, and outside basically the boundaries of a region, right? So this is where, again, the data portability is about this individual, the owner of the actual owner of the data, they have this right that they can take their data from one platform or one device to any other platform, any other device. So nobody can restrict them to do so because they are the rightful owner of the data. And then lastly, it's about right to object the processing and profiling of the automated. So basically what happens is like a lot of organizations basically use AIs or bots for processing this information, right? And then we have seen that a lot of social media platforms also collect a lot of information about us, and then they process it for various reasons. So we can actually object against that. So that is another right under GDPR. So I think we have sort of covered a lot of different aspects about GDPR, but let's also take a look at some of the laws, other data protection laws around the world. Right? So I'll give you a minute to basically just look at them, but there are some very prominent ones, right? For example, in US, the California law is like one of the most prominent ones, but then similarly, there are a lot of other laws as well. I'll also pick the example of India. So India has basically tabled a bill around personal data protection. It's still not a law, but the bill is already on the table. And it seems to be one of the most, I think, stringent laws that would basically come into application if it becomes a law. Now let's talk about my favorite topic, which is decentralized identity. So basically, decentralized identity is a user-centric identity powered by blockchain or distributed ledger technology. So before we actually start talking about decentralized identity, I just want to basically share some of the identity trends that are happening in the industry, right? So now what is happening is like we are actually, as a world, we are moving towards consumer-centric processes, right? Where individuals are at the center of everything. They are at the center of the value creation, they are at the center of the services being sold, and they are center of everything, right? And that is where, and a lot of personalization also happens, right? Oh, okay, I haven't done this, sorry. So a lot of personalization also happens around the individual need, right? So a lot of data is getting collected, and then the data is getting used for personalizing ads, services, and so many other things. Similarly, it's about self-managed and owned identity, right? So because there are so many stringent data protection laws around the world, so the ownership has become very important, or actually it becomes crucial, right? There's no way out. So now the individual is the owner, so that is where they can actually manage it, right? So with respect to what happens with that data. And then basically all the different organizations or service providers, they want to provide seamless user experiences. And then for that to happen, they need to basically understand the profile of an individual, right? They need to understand the persona of an individual. Security, privacy, I think we have talked about this, that all the organizations, they have become very conscious about security and privacy. And it's not that they want to do this, but they don't have any choice, right? Because of all the data protection laws. And this is where security and privacy is now underlying principle of most of the IT systems around the world. And even basically non-IT systems for that matter. Now we also have mobile devices everywhere. And I think that is where I think it becomes important. It has to, how do you ensure that people who are using mobile devices for various different purposes with respect to engaging with the digital ecosystem, so how do you ensure that works seamlessly with the identity of the individual while accessing different services using the mobile device? Then we have AIs and robots everywhere. So it's like we are building IoT ecosystems. We have smart devices in our homes, in our factories, in our offices, in our organizations. And then they are processing data everywhere, right? And this is the ground reality. We know that. We have Alexa at our home. We have so many other personal assistants everywhere processing our information, right, left, and center, 24 hours across the day. And again, I've covered this, right? IoT is a disruptor, so everything is connected. We are living in a connected world. Everybody knows everything about everyone. So Facebook knows everything about us. Google knows everything about us. So it's like the connected world is the new reality. And then biometrics is also everywhere, right? So if I take the example of India, let's say. So in India, there's this Aadhaar program, which is the national identity program. And then they have captured the data of 1 billion citizens. So they have the biometrics information of 1 billion people, right? And if you look at the Western world, including US, we have surveillance all over the world, right? We can see that if we go to a hotel, if we go to a conference, if we go to an office, we have surveillance all over the place. We have cameras recording everything. We also have cameras in our homes, right? So for security purposes, but we are recording everything. So these are some of the trends which are there, and which sort of define how identity should be working, right? How do we basically create an identity which is basically fit for purpose, and which goes with trends, but it also basically solves some of the challenges. So before we start talking about what decentralized identity is, let's talk about some of the challenges that we have with the current models. And I think these are some of the models, right? And I think these are self-explanatory. We all know that there are so many prominent identity frauds and thefts, right? And they are part of the life. You can talk about any platform around the world. You can talk about any corporate around the world. You can talk about any government around the world. They have been basically, there have been data breaches, there have been identity thefts, there have been identity frauds. And the impact of identity thefts and frauds, it's basically financial, it's reputational, it's emotional. So it's like it impacts individuals, organizations, and governments alike. So this is like one of the biggest challenges that we have out there. Similarly, we can talk about lack of user privacy. I think we have talked about surveillance that basically sort of plays against the user privacy. Similarly, the compliance overhead. So the initial topic was about privacy, data protection, and all the laws and regulations which are around the world. So we have regional laws, we have global laws, and then there's a compliance overhead. And actually large organizations, they are spending millions of dollars to basically comply with these laws. And if they're not compliant, actually they can be fined up to a few percentages, and this is specifically from GDPR perspective. They can be fined up to a few percentage of their revenue, which can actually go into billions. Then it's also about efficient and repetitive processes, right? So we have seen this in our personal lives, that we share the same information about ourselves with so many different organizations, right? We go through the same processes. If you have to open a bank account, if you have to basically get an insurance, you have to buy a car, if you buy a house, or if you have to get employment, or maybe if you have to basically get healthcare services. So we are providing the same information again and again, and then the same information is getting verified about us. So we know how KYC works, how AML works, but those processes are being repeated very inefficiently. Then we can talk about paper-based certification of the process. And I think everybody in this room understand that how blockchain is being actually explored, about how you can basically issue digital certificates. So instead of having paper-based certificates like your degree certificates, your educational credentials, your employment credentials, I think from paper, how can we move to digital? Because paper is, first of all, it's not good for the environment, but then it's very frictional in nature. And it can be easily tampered with, it can be easily copied and misused. And lastly, I think it's about unethical behavior and practices. So I think it sort of summarizes everything that I've just talked about, right? So it's like there are organizations, there are individuals who basically unethically collect information, they process information, and then they misuse information. So these are some of the challenges that are out there, right? And I think because of all these things, I think there's an evolution of the digital identity, right? And I think we all know that it started as a centralized identity system, basically where a single organization is basically issuing an identity to an individual, and it's controlled by that organization. So we can talk about, let's say, a national identity. So it's issued by a particular government. We can talk about an employee ID, which is again issued by a particular employer. And similarly, we can talk about a lot of other identities. So they are issued by one single organization, and it's controlled by them. And it can also be revoked by the same organization. And it has a very specific jurisdiction with respect to where that identity would be used or consumed. And then we move to federated, right? So I think this is where a lot of organizations started collaborating, and then they started basically using the same identity within that ecosystem. So we can talk about Facebook ID, we can talk about Google ID, and then I think within the corporate space, our organization can basically use the same ID for their partner ecosystem as well. So it's a federated model. Now, I think now we are moving towards a decentralized identity model, right? Where the identity is basically decentralized from two perspectives. One is from the storage perspective, storage of the identity information, and the second is from the control perspective. So when we talk about the storage, so right now when we talk about the centralized or the federated systems, the information of all the stakeholders, right, of all the employees, all the citizens, they are stored in one single centralized database or a system, information system. And once that gets hacked, it impacts all the users or all the individuals whose data is stored there, right? For example, if somebody is able to hack Aadhaar's database, then they can get away with the data of 1 billion people. And similarly, and this is not something which I'm making up, this is actually happening, right? And there are a lot of big systems, public or private in nature, which have been hacked and data have been stolen. But what decentralized identity does is basically it's about that the data storage is also decentralized in the sense like your data is with you in your private wallet, and that the definition of wallet is slightly flexible. So the wallet could be on your private device, like for example, mobile phone. It could be in the cloud, but again, it's like a piece of space which is allocated to you, or it could be on a decentralized storage as well, right? For example, IPFS. And the second part is the control, right? So the decentralization of the control. And this is about how you as an individual is able to control your information, and I as an individual and the owner of the data, I am able to control my information. So this is basically the decentralization happens at two levels, the storage as well as the control. Okay, so let's talk about what user-centric decentralized identity actually means. So obviously, we are talking about a user, and then he has certain information about himself. And then in this new world, we are talking about an ID wallet, right? Wherein basically, irrespective of what that platform is, mobile, cloud, web, or hardware wallet, they have a wallet where they are able to basically store their information. They are owning and managing this private wallet or private space. But then we have an ecosystem, excuse me, ecosystem of organizations and service providers who are actually issuing different types of identity or information or certificates or credentials to this individual or this user. And what they end up doing is like, so they basically directly issue all these credentials directly to the user wallet. So the way we have to compare this is that in today's world, basically we get a driving license which is physical in nature. We get a passport which is again physical, paper copy. We get our university credentials, we get our employment credentials, all paper copies, and then we struggle to basically maintain them, right? And then even if we are talking about digitization in certain cases, thank you. So so basically if we compare, even if we basically start digitizing some of the records, even then I think it's very frictional because that they would be stored in respective databases, right? And that is what we are moving away from. So in this particular model, the identity is, or the ecosystem is actually being built around the user, and then all the records about that individual is getting issued directly to the user's wallet. And so that he or she is able to basically control how that data is being shared, consumed, stored, or ported, or whatever we talked about, GDPR and the different principles, right? So all those things can be applied here with this one single solution, which is basically an identity wallet. Now, I think the key question is, why is it needed, right? I think there's a spelling mistake, but why is it needed? It's needed because of various reasons, right? So first of all is like the value and the usefulness, because obviously, I think as an owner of my information, I want to basically use it and optimize it for various different reasons. I want to make sure that it's fit for purpose. And World Economic Forum has actually defined 5 elements of user value, right? One is fit for purpose, second is inclusive, third is useful, offers choice, and secure. So basically it's like, so we are looking at decentralized identity, the model of decentralized identity, because we want to make sure that these different elements are met with, right? So that is one of the reasons why this is needed. The second reason is about data minimalism and transparency. Again, coming back to GDPR and other data protection laws, how do you ensure that you are sharing minimum amount of data for a particular transaction? For example, yesterday when I came into this building, so I was asked whether I am vaccinated. So I showed the proof of my vaccination. Then I also showed a proof of my identity. But then when I share my driving license, actually when I show my driving license to a stranger, there's a lot of information that I'm actually sharing with him or her, right? Because my name is there, my address is there, my date of birth is there, and so much more. And an individual and that particular individual may be able to record that information and misuse it, right? And this is where basically we have to ensure how that we minimize the data, and then we ensure that transparency is there, right? With respect to how that data is being managed and consumed. And then it's about ecosystems, right? So we should be building ecosystems around individuals, not vice versa. And it's about again, because I think all people in this room, at least most of us, are interested in the new decentralized tech, right? And it's about how do you basically, because we believe in this, right? And that is where it's about understanding how we can apply these concepts to identity, to our digital identities. And then it's about also removing the silos, right? Because right now, I think a lot of information about me is basically stored in a lot of different systems. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. And that is why a lot of service providers, they are not able to provide the right service to me, right? The right level of service to me, because maybe they don't know the complete picture about me, right? And this, in certain cases, it goes against privacy, but in certain cases, it actually works in your favor if they have the right information about you. And then lastly, it's about the sectors, right? Because across different sectors, the information has different purposes. So it's about how different organizations are able to basically compete and provide better services to individuals. So I think there are a lot of reasons why we need to basically look at and take this model very seriously. Okay, now the key question is like, okay, we sort of understand what decentralized identity is, why is it needed? But the key question is how would it work or how does it work, right? And I think again, we have a user and the user would have a self-managed digital identity, right? So we would have an identity which would be managed by the user in terms of basically the control. And then also they would be different issuing organizations would be issuing identity directly to that issue, right? Which is basically in the control of the user. So what we are saying is that, so we are changing the model. So we are saying that the issuing authorities would issue that identity directly to the user wallet, and then that is where the user would basically maintain the control. Then it's also about identity ownership, which we have again discussed, that who owns the data, right? And I think I want to discuss one point where so I was participating in a debate in the US and in the UK Parliament, and it was about who owns the healthcare data, whether it's the medical professional, whether it's the patient, whether it's the laboratory, or whether it's like any other, like maybe the insurer, right? So it's like who owns that data, and that is where I think in this model, and again, as we talk about the different data protection laws, the individual is the owner of the data, right? So it's about establishing that ownership. Then it's basically a decentralized web of trust, right? So again, it's about how do you ensure that different individuals around the world and then different organizations, they are basically connected in a way where the trust can be established for various different reasons. Similarly, it's about based on informed consent, because I think consent is one of the underlying parameter, right? It's about an individual should be consenting for the consumption of the information and for the processing of the information. And then lastly, it's about identity issuance and validation. Okay. For the trusted ecosystem, right? So it's again we are talking about ecosystem, but it's a trusted ecosystem. And lastly, it's about consumption of personalized information, right? It's about consumption of personalized information. It's about provision of personalized experiences as well. Okay, so EarthID, as I mentioned earlier, so I am the founder and CEO of EarthID, which is a award-winning decentralized identity management platform, and we have actually implemented this solution, which has taken the key principles of decentralized identity and different data protection laws, and we have built this solution, and it has a few components, right? So first of all, it has a user wallet, and it also has a distributed ledger layer, right, which talks about the decentralized identity. And what it allows is that it allows the issuers and the verifiers and the owner of the information to basically connect with each other in a very frictionless manner and in a very low coupling manner, right? So it's about how do you ensure that these three stakeholders of the identity information are able to interact with each other in a very frictionless and in a very trusted manner. Because right now, that process is not necessarily working because there's a huge cost and time associated with the processing of the information. And then that also leads to different types of frauds. So this is where basically it's about how do you connect different pieces together to bring together a solution which is fit for purpose. And there's also a concept of verifiable credentials, right? So basically verifiable credentials are digital credentials which follow certain standards so that they become interoperable. For example, right now, if I talk about 5 or 20 different types of ID documents, they don't work together because you are not able to basically use them in a selective data disclosure fashion, right? Either you show everything or you don't show anything. But with this model, you can actually do selective data disclosure. So within the same document, you can still basically decide what you want to share. And some of the key features are basically decentralized identity, which we now sort of understand. And then it's about verifiable credentials. It's about multi-channel wallets, right? Because not everybody is using a mobile device. Yes, most of us use mobile devices for various reasons, but maybe we don't want to use it for identity. And that is where it's important to have multi-channel wallets. So it's like either it could be a hardware wallet. Maybe I want to basically use, like the way I use a debit card, I should be able to basically carry my identity in a card, a smart card, and I should be able to present it to wherever I have to present it. Then it's about selective data disclosure. So I should be able to choose what I want to share. I don't want to share everything. I want to share a small iota of information about myself for a specific purpose. Then it's zero knowledge proof, wherein certain, and I'm not going to go in detail for this, but it's a technical concept where you are able to basically prove certain things about yourself without sharing any iota of information. For example, I can prove that I'm an adult, maybe I'm a UK citizen, or maybe I'm employed by a certain organization. And then it's also about how do you use biometrics for bringing, because biometrics is a very integral part of an individual's identity, and how do you use it for various different reasons, right? From a security perspective, from an authentication perspective. So it's about, we have incorporated different types of biometrics into this solution. And then lastly, you can also use this solution for passwordless authentication, because we know that most of the frauds or data breaches happen because of weak or stolen passwords. So if you can take away the passwords, then we can solve a lot of problems. Now let's talk about some of the use cases, right? And I think some of the use cases are like where we have worked with some of our customers and partners to deliver some value, and there are certain use cases where we have done research, where we have had discussions, and we understand that these are some of the potential use cases. One of the biggest one, and I think I really appreciate this one, because it's about digital identities for different sort of stakeholders. They could be citizens, they could be employees, they could be students. So it's like, how do you issue ID documents which are non-frictional, right? Which are digital in nature, and they actually comply with all the data regulations, right? So that is what one of the, you can use it for that. So corporates can use it to issue employee IDs, governments can use it for citizen IDs, and then universities can use it for issuing student identities. Then access to public and private services, right? Obviously, when we access any type of services, we need to basically prove our identity. We need to go through a process. We need to go through an onboarding process. We need to go through a KYC process, and so on and so forth. So it's about, okay, it's about how do you basically ensure that it becomes a frictionless and a cost saving and a trustworthy model. One of the interesting use cases, digital voting, because I think this is again one of the debates that is happening in the industry, that can be whether we can move to digital voting, right? And then a lot of people debate that it goes against the democratic process, but then there are certain parts of the world where this is happening, where people are using this technology, or at least piloting this technology or testing this technology for digital voting, right? And this is not just about the democratic process. This can actually be used for corporate voting as well. And then it's education and employment. So right now, again, I think it's about how do you ensure that you are able to take your educational credentials or your professional credentials and seek employment, right? Because a lot of frauds are happening within this space with respect to people using fake credentials for gaining employment. And this is where basically this technology can actually ensure that so those frauds can be prevented, and then you can remove the friction. Healthcare, within the healthcare, basically, I think when we talk about a patient and a doctor relationship, it's a very private and confidential relationship, and there are a lot of information that is being shared between those two parties, right? And it's about how do you ensure that this information remains confidential, and also it's about the healthcare data ownership, right? We have been talking about how do we ensure that my health data is owned by me, and I am able to basically use it in a way where it's fit for purpose, and it basically gives me the right access to healthcare services around the world. Then it's also about travel and hospitality. So we did a basically POC with the Indian government where it's about how you can use this technology to basically create seamless travel. So imagine you land at the airport and then you don't have to basically show your passport or your tickets or visa to anybody, and then you can just walk through the airport and then just board the flight. So this is where basically it's like how do you integrate biometrics and decentralized identity and various other aspects into creating the solution. Then there are a few other aspects with respect to digital wallets across smart cities and smart businesses. And then it's also about identities across IoTs and smart. So it's about, you can use this same technology for more than just individuals. You can use this technology for smart devices as well as businesses and so many other entities. And on that note, I would like to basically close the presentation. Any questions? Yes.
So they've implemented digital ID in India fairly extensively. And what do you have to say about that? And are there digital identity apps or frameworks you see developing that we should engage in to simplify our work?
Right. No, I think that's a very good point because, and it's a very good question as well. So India is being seen as a pioneer in the digital identity space because that is one of the first countries which managed to issue digital identity to more than 1 billion people. And then on back of that digital identity, those people were able to basically get access to different services. So it actually drives social and financial inclusion. So in that sense, digital identity is very important. And similar other programs are also there around the world. You can talk about Australia, you can talk about Estonia, and in different parts of the world, where digital identity in different various forms and shapes is being basically implemented.
Shiv, thank you for sharing this. This is, I think, it's a fascinating solution that you found. So,
thank you.
Congratulations to you. I understand the technical aspect of the blockchain, although I don't quite get it how the decentralization storage is going to work when you deal with this ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So my question to you at the collaboration level, all these different organizations, how are you approaching them that, okay, work with us so that you could push out the digital certificate that you're issuing? That's a humongous effort. How Absolutely. Are you handling that?
It's a very important question, and I'm so happy that you asked this question. Because I think, see, what is happening is like in the industry, there are like organizations like EarthID who are basically trying to achieve this in one way or other, right? But then there's also push from governments as well. For example, like the European Union, they have also already basically asked the different countries to basically start talking about digital wallets for the citizens, right? So this is already happening. So there's a top-down push as well as bottom-up push. So we are pushing from one direction, and then there are organizations, public sector organizations or governments who are pushing from the other direction. I can give you another example. For example, NHS, which is the National Health Services of UK, they are also piloting this technology to use it for their healthcare workers. So in that sense, basically, there are different initiatives around the world. And then we can also talk about industry leaders or organizations which are sitting on top of like big industries likes of MasterCards, Vodafone. They're also basically piloting this technology. So this is happening. Obviously, we can always debate about the pace of adoption, but it's being adopted.
So you named a few organizations that are in countries that are implementing this technology. Are they doing it using blockchain, or is it still centralized to them when they're issuing digital
That's a very good question. See, the thing is like, what is happening is like, if we talk about the adoption of blockchain in general as well, right? I think people are trying to basically adopt the principles, and in certain cases, they still basically go with a hybrid model, right? So when I spoke about the Aadhaar program in India, it's a completely centralized solution. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are organizations which are trying to basically adopt a completely decentralized model. But at the moment, I think a lot of programs are looking at a hybrid solution. And it's also about the type of blockchain, right? Even if they're talking about using a decentralized solution, there are so many options with respect to the different types of blockchain and the features and everything. So that is where I think, like for example, there are a lot of DLTs, which are not necessarily blockchains, but they still provide the decentralized aspect, right? So in that sense, there are different flavors that are being tested at the moment. And I think that is where I think with time, I think we will see basically what exactly where we land, right? In terms of the degree of decentralization that we are able to achieve with this.
I'm just going to bring up one other thing, and maybe we can discuss at a different time, but
sure.
I've been wondering from the technical aspect of a decentralized identity, whether it's a public blockchain, a private blockchain, and between either one at the digital, at the distributed ledger level, what information is stored there and how, because I find it very interesting. privacy and anonymity with also transparency. We talk a lot about those together, but how do those work together?
No, this, you're absolutely in the right direction. So the thing is, like, one of the key principles is that you don't store any private or personal identifiable information on the blockchain, and that is where there are different aspects how you basically achieve this. And on that note, I think we can connect separately as well. But thank you very much, everyone. Sorry. Sorry for the delay.